Hello and welcome to my guide to building a PC. If you've never built a PC before, the whole process can actually seem quite daunting and it puts a lot of people off. But don't worry, it's not as difficult as it sounds, and in this video I'm going to run you through the stages of doing it in a step-by-step process. So the first thing I want to do is have a look at the parts we've got here today. So for the case, I've gone with Lian Li's Lancool 2 in white. For the motherboard, it's from ASRock. We've got a B450 Steel Legend. For the CPU, we've got a Ryzen 7 2700X 8-core CPU. Keeping that CPU cool, we've got a 240mm AIO from Cooler Master, their ML240R RGB. I've also got a series of fans from Cooler Master as well, and we're going to use those as case fans for the build. For the RAM, we've got 16GB of Corsair Vengeance RGB in white, and that's 3200 MHz in speed. For the graphics card, it's a ROG Strix RTX 2070. Powering the whole build, we've got a fully modular gold power supply from Corsair, their RM750X. For storage, I've actually got 3 drives for this build. We've got a 1TB NVMe M.2 SSD from Sabrent. I've also got a SATA SSD 500GB from Samsung, their 860 EVO, and we've got a 2TB hard drive, the Seagate Barracuda. I've also got 3 options in this build. You don't need to include these, but it will make your build look a little bit better. So I've got some cable extensions for the power supply in black and white from CableMod. And Lian Li offer a range of accessories for this case. I've picked up 2 of them. So I've got a vertical GPU bracket, and this ROG Strix GPU is going to look great in vertical orientation. And I've also picked up the addressable RGB strip for the case. Okay, so that's the parts. Let's get on with the build. Okay, so the first thing I like to do when I'm building a PC is to repair the case. And what I like to do is get rid of any panels that we're not going to need during the build to make the build process that little bit easier. So in this case, there's a glass panel on the front that comes off, there's one on the back that comes off, and the front panel comes off. And we're also able to get rid of the dust filter at the top, setting everything to the side where we're going to need them later on. So to open this case, we just pull this front panel down, and then the glass panel is going to swing open. And all we need to do is tilt the panel from side to side and it'll lift off. And we can just repeat the same process then on the back. To remove the front panel, we just need to pull firmly on the top. So the back of this case has 2 panels that hide the cables. So it's going to be much easier to build if we remove these and set them to the side as well. So there's just a screw here and a screw here holding them on. So you can see this case comes with 3 fans. There's 1 fan here, 1 here, and 1 here. And these are black fans that don't have any RGB. We've got a whole range of nice case fans from Cooler Master. So we're going to take these fans out and make space for the Cooler Master fans. So the fans are just held on with 4 screws in each corner, so these just need removed. So every case that you buy tends to come with a little pack of accessories. So there's screws to fix on the motherboard, to secure the hard drives, and to secure the power supply. And quite often you get some cable ties or Velcro straps to help with cable management at the back. So quite often these are generally hidden in one of the hard drive slots. So we open this case up and we'll check the hard drive cage. So there we go. So we've got a little box in here. I'll have a look and see what's in here. So we've got some Velcro straps for cable management, cable ties, some instructions, and some screws for securing fans, hard drives, motherboard and power supply. Okay, so that's the case ready to go. The next thing we need to do is have a look at the motherboard. Okay, so the first thing I like to do with the motherboard is to install the CPU, and the CPU is going to go into the CPU socket on the center of the motherboard. Okay, so to prepare the socket for the CPU, we need to lift this little lever here. So to do that, we just need to put it over towards ourselves and then lift it all the way over to the right. And now the socket is ready to receive the CPU. So we have a close-up look at the socket. What you'll notice is that the corner on the top left has a little triangle on it, and that's important because we're going to use that to orientate the CPU in the socket. So I'll just give you a close-up of that. So you can see the little triangle on that corner, and none of the other corners on the CPU socket have that triangle. Okay, so we've now got our CPU to install. When you take it out of the box, it comes in a little plastic protection. So it's important when you take it out of this that you hold the CPU by the side. So we don't want to touch the top of the CPU, and we definitely don't want to touch the bottom of the CPU. You can see all the little gold pins that are on the bottom of it. And if we were to touch those, we could potentially bend those and damage the CPU itself. Now remember I pointed out the little triangle on the socket. What you'll notice on the CPU itself, we've also got a little gold triangle. So you can see that gold triangle just there. And this is to line the CPU up with the socket. And when we look at the underside of the CPU as well, you'll also notice there's a little gold triangle in the same place. So again, this is to make sure you install the CPU in the socket in the right orientation. Okay, so we're ready to install the CPU in the socket. You can see I've got my little triangle here and the triangle on the CPU itself lined up. Now it's important that I just lower this down into the socket and it's going to fall into place. It's really important I don't push on top of the CPU, because if I do and it's not seated properly, I can damage those gold pins. So I'm literally just going to drop it down into place, hover it around and wait for the CPU to fall in like it has done. I'm not going to go pushing around on the top of it. And then to secure it in place, all I need to do is close this little lever. So there we go, we've now installed the CPU on the motherboard. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is install the RAM, and it's these 4 sockets over here that we want to install in. Now the problem with the kit that we have got has only 2 sticks of RAM, and this motherboard has 4 sockets. So we can't just pick and choose which sockets we go into. Every motherboard has preferred sockets that you should occupy first if you've only got 2 sticks of RAM. And in this motherboard, it's this socket here, so the second one along from the CPU, and the 4th one along from the CPU that we should insert the RAM into. This tends to be this way for most motherboards, but you should read the manual to make sure you're installing them in the right sockets so that you get the maximum speed. So to prepare the motherboard to receive the RAM, all we need to do is open the clip at the top on each of the 2 sockets that we want to install the RAM into. Okay, so this is our RAM. Now what you'll notice when you look at it is you've got the little gold connectors along the bottom. And you'll notice that this side is slightly shorter than this side over here. So the gold connectors aren't equal in length. And when you look at the motherboard itself, you'll notice that the sockets aren't equal in length. This side is definitely longer than this side. So it's important you have the RAM orientated the right way when you're going to install it. So to install the RAM, all I need to do is line it up with the socket on both sides. And then all I'm going to do is push down and it should lock into place. And we just need to repeat the same process with the second stick of RAM. So line them up with the socket and then just push down to lock into place. Okay, so that's the CPU and the RAM installed. So the next thing I like to install is the M.2 SSD. So this motherboard has 2 M.2 sockets, so we've got one behind this heatsink and one down the bottom of the motherboard. So the one at the top of the motherboard will actually run at much faster speeds than the one at the bottom. So it makes sense for us to use this one at the top. Also, we should use this heatsink as well because it's going to keep our drive cool when it's running. It is important to note that when you plug an M.2 SSD into some motherboards, that you will be deactivating other features. So when we install an M.2 SSD into this top socket, we will deactivate this port. which won't be a problem for us because we're going to install our graphics card into this top socket. But if you were planning a dual graphics card setup, it could be a problem. Likewise, if we were to install an M.2 SSD into the bottom, 2 of the SATA ports on the motherboard would be deactivated. So again, might not be a problem for you, but it's important that you know what you're doing by installing drives in certain sockets. So really, before you start your build, it's important you read the motherboard so that 1, you're installing your drives into the fastest socket, and 2, you're aware of any implications of using that socket will have on limiting what else you can install to the motherboard. Okay, so we're going to install our M.2 SSD into this socket. So the first thing we need to remove is these 2 screws holding on the heatsink. Okay, so we now can see the M.2 SSD socket, and we've also got this little standoff that's used to secure it on. You can see there's also little places here, here, and here where you can move the standoff depending on the length of your M.2 SSD. So before you start, it's important you size up your drive to see if the standoff is in the right place. So we set our drive along the top. Yes, it looks like that standoff is in the right place. To install the M.2 drive into the socket, we just need to insert it into the socket at a slight angle and push it into place. Then whenever the heatsink goes on, it will be held in place. Okay, so we've got the heatsink. All we need to do is remove this plastic wrap from the back. And then we can just set it down in place. And then we can just secure the drive and the heatsink back down. Okay, so we're now ready to install the motherboard into the case. Before we do, there's a couple of important things to check. The first is that if you look at the motherboard, there's 3 holes in 3 different rows along the motherboard. And when we look at the back of the case, there's these little metal standoffs that we're going to screw into. And we want to check that the standoffs are in the right position. So we line up the motherboard. And actually, looking at all the holes and the standoffs, they all look to be in the right place. If they weren't in the right place, we may need to just readjust these standoffs and move the position of them. Now, what's really important before we go ahead and put the motherboard into the case, we need to install the I/O shield. You really don't want to forget about this. And at the back of the case, there's a little cutout for this. So it's important we install it up the right way. And what you can see at the bottom here, we've got these 6 ports. So this is obviously the bottom of the I/O shield. Okay, so to install the I/O shield, all we want to do is slot this into place. And then we're just going to have to push it in till it clicks. And again, just check that all sides are clicked into place by giving it a good push. Okay, so we just need to slide the motherboard into the case and line the ports up with the I/O shield. And then we just need to get each of the 9 screws and screw the motherboard into place. So I like to start at the center. Okay, so our motherboard is now installed in the case. I haven't built a number of PCs before. The temptation is to get the CPU cooler on next and all the fans installed. But the problem is once you install fans down the bottom and a CPU cooler on top, getting all your cables plugged in down the bottom and at the top is much more difficult. So in fact, the next thing I would recommend doing is getting all your case cables plugged in. So the case cables come from the ports at the top. You've got your USB sockets, you've got your on-off switch, you've got a reset switch, you've got a controller for RGB all at the top of this case. And obviously the case needs to connect to the motherboard for the ports on the case to work. And these are what your case cables are for. So the next thing we need to do is plug these case cables in to the motherboard. Now, most people think cable management is something you do right at the end, but it's really important that we run these cables in the most direct route at this stage to make cable management at the end straightforward. So if we're going to plug, for example, the HD audio, which goes from the mic and headphone jack at the front, it always goes down this far corner of the motherboard. So it's important we run the cable and bring it up the closest slot to plug it in. So that means you're going to have less cable on show at the front, and your cables are going to be nice and organised along the back. So let's plug these cables in. So this is the HD audio cable that I mentioned. So I'm going to bring it up into the closest slot, and it goes into this header on the far left bottom corner of the motherboard. So all I need to do is plug this in, and we've now got HD audio installed. Okay, so the next cable that we want to plug in is the USB 3 cable. So it's going to plug into this socket on the motherboard. So for this cable, we're just going to bring it through the back. And you'll notice on the cable there's a little mark here which lines up with the mark on the socket. So all we need to do is line that up and then push it in. And then we can pull the rest of the cable back through to the back. Okay, so the next lot of cables we need to plug in are the front panel connectors. We've got the power switch, the reset switch, and the power LED, positive and negative. So these cables are notoriously difficult to plug in, they're fiddly, and you've got a socket at the bottom which you need to really look closely at your manual to make sure you're plugging them in the right slot and also in the right orientation. These 2-pin connectors, if you look at the back very closely, there's one that has an arrow on it, and that is highlighting the positive. So you just need to look really closely at the diagram in your motherboard manual. Okay, so I'm going to bring the cables through this slot in the case, which is closest to the header that we want to plug them into. So the pin at the top left is for the power LED positive, and the one next to it, power LED negative. So we just find these. So we've got power LED, positive and negative. So we're just going to plug them in. Okay, so power LED positive, power LED negative. So we've got 2 left to plug in. We have power switch and reset switch. Okay, so next to that is the power switch. So we'll plug it into the top row. And then the reset switch needs to go directly below that. So you can see space is quite tight, and if I had fans sitting here, you could imagine plugging these cables in would be quite difficult. Okay, so looking at the back, the only remaining cables we've got to plug in, we've got a SATA power cable, which will plug into our power supply when we plug it in. And we've also got an addressable RGB plug, and we could plug this into the header on our motherboard now, but because our AIO has a controller, we're going to leave it and plug it into the controller on the back at a later stage. So for the same reason as I like to plug in the front panel connectors now before I install any fans or AIO, I also like to plug in the power cables, because particularly this little one at the top which supplies power to the CPU, once you've got a radiator and fans, it can be quite difficult to plug this cable in. So on the motherboard there's only 2 places where cables are going to go from the power supply. There's this 8-pin plug at the top, and we've also got a 24-pin plug over to the side. So I'm going to be using cable extensions when I come to plug in to my power supply, and all they really do is they go on to the black cables that come out of the power supply, and they improve the aesthetics of the build. So I can go ahead and plug these 2 cables in now. Okay, so I've got my black and white cable extension, which I'm going to plug into this port up the top. So it clicks and locks into place, and then all we need to do is fold the rest of the cable back through the port at the top. And we've got 2 little black clips which will just tidy the cables up. And we'll not worry about plugging that in. We're going to plug the other end into our power supply cables later in the build. And then likewise, we can plug in the 24-pin connector. So it's just going to plug into here. And then we can pass the cable through this little bracket here. And out to the back of the case. And then we'll connect that up at a later stage when we're managing all our power supply cables. Okay, so the next thing is to install the AIO and the fans. Okay, so I've now got the 240mm Cooler Master AIO. We've got a radiator at the top, we've got some pipes, and then we've got a pump. And we're going to put fans onto this, and the pump is going to pump water around the radiator, and the fans are then going to take the heat out of it. So the first thing we need to do with this is decide what orientation we're going to install it. So I like to have this up the top. There's space at the top for a 240 or 280mm radiator. We just first of all need to decide if we're going to have it in this orientation or this orientation. And I always like my AIO coolers to be in this orientation with the pipes coming down from the left-hand side. So we're going to go with that. The other important thing to look at the pump is we want to make sure we've got the logo round the way we want it. One of the nice things about this cooler is the logo comes off the front. So it'll just peel off and we can rotate it round. So that's not going to be an issue with this particular cooler. So I think we're going to have it installed in this orientation and then rotating round, and I think I'm going to have the pipes coming here on the right hand side. Again, you can have them at the bottom, you can have them at the top, or all the way around this way. But I think that's just where I want it to be. And that's important to work out as well, because we're going to have to install a little bracket onto here. And the way we install the bracket depends on which orientation we want this to be in. So that's the next stage. We're going to install the bracket onto the CPU cooler and put fans onto the radiator. Okay, so the first bit I want to do is I want to install the bracket that's going to allow me to secure this to my motherboard. Now importantly, this CPU cooler can be used with a whole range of AMD or Intel motherboards. So the little bracket that you're going to secure on will depend on which motherboard you're using. So this one is designed for M4, and it's important that I secure it the right way round. So when I looked at my CPU cooler, I wanted it sitting in this orientation. So I need to have this little clip on the top here then. So that means I'm going to need to screw it down through here. Okay, that's one side on. Just repeat the same process with the other side. Okay, so we now should be able to clip this onto our motherboard. The next thing is to put the fans on the radiator. Okay, so when installing the fans, there's two important things to remember. And the first is the direction of airflow through the fan. So fans always have a front and a back, and you can see this side looks like the front, and this side with these black bits of plastic is the back. So air will go in through the front of the fan and out the back. So it's important that we install this on the radiator in the direction that we want airflow to go. So this is going to be at the top of our case, and we want it to blow air out through the radiator and out of the case. We may want a different build to do it a slightly different way, but for this build, that's the direction I want it. So it's important that I install this fan on the radiator in this orientation. If I was to install it in this orientation, it would pull air from outside through the radiator and bring the hot air into the case. And again, there may not be anything wrong with that depending on the build that you're doing, but for my particular build here, I want it to push air out of the case and out through the radiator. The thing with the fans is one side always looks better, and the front of the fans looks so much better than the back of the fans. So that's part of the reason you may want to have them in this orientation. Now, the other thing that we need to be really careful when we're installing the fans is we want these cables to come out the back of the radiator so they can go out the back of the case. We wouldn't want the fans being installed and having these cables coming out the front and seeing them. So it's important we have the radiator in the right orientation before we install onto it. We said we wanted the radiator in this orientation. So when we install the fans, it's important we have them round like this so that the cables are going to come out the back of the case. And there's the second fan on. And then all we need to do to secure them onto the radiator is to use these screws. Okay, so one of the key steps when you're installing anything is you don't want to over tighten any of the screws, and you always want to go in diagonals when you're tightening anything up. So we're going to start with this screw, over to the diagonal one, over to this one, and then over to here. And again, we're not over tightening these screws at all, they're just nice and gently. Okay. Okay, we're now ready to install the CPU killer, and I think lying the case flat on its back makes this process much easier. So before we add the CPU killer on top of the CPU, we need to add a little bit of thermal paste on top of the CPU. And everybody has an opinion on the best way to add thermal paste. My preferred way is just to add a pea-sized amount into the center of the CPU, and then when you tighten the CPU killer down on top, it's going to then flatten it down and cover the whole of the CPU. Just be careful, the CPU killer you use might come with thermal paste pre-applied. If it does, make sure you don't add more. And the other thing to make sure is that you've removed any plastic covering from your CPU killer before adding it on. So the one I'm going to use doesn't come with thermal paste applied, and we're going to have to add a little bit on top of the CPU. So I'm just going to squeeze out a little bit here. Just about a pea-sized amount. There we go. So you can either start off by installing the radiator to the top of the case, or by installing the pump head onto the CPU itself. And I prefer to start with the pump head onto the CPU, because particularly with the clips that we're going to be using for the CPU cooler, it can be a little bit more awkward, and having that free rein on the pipes coming from the CPU cooler makes the process that little bit easier. Okay, so this was the orientation that we wanted to install this into the case, and what you'll see is this CPU cooler has little clips here, and the bracket here has a little clip, so we just need to slide them over and then tighten the thumb screws down. So if we position this into the center and try and get this to the back clip on, so that's the back clip clipped on, and then if we go over the front and clip the front on, then all we need to do is tighten up these thumb screws. Okay, so that's that nice and tight. Okay, coming from the pump head, we've got two cables. We've got an addressable RGB cable and one that supplies power to the pump. So we need to supply the one that supplies power to the pump into the water pump header on the top right hand corner of the motherboard. So it's only got 3 pins. The socket has 4, but because there's a little clip here, it will just fit on to the right 3 pins. So there's 2 headers at the top. The one closest to me is for the water pump. The one furthest away is for the fans on the radiator. And this other one we're just going to push out the back of the case, and we're going to plug it in at the end when we're plugging in all the RGB. Okay, I have mentioned before, once we put this radiator and fans at the top, getting into these fan headers at the top of the motherboard is going to be that bit more difficult. We are going to have to plug a splitter cable that comes in the AIO pack into the CPU fan header at the top. So for me, it makes sense to plug this in now and poke it out to the back of the case where we can make the connection at a later stage. So it's this end here that's going to plug into the CPU fan header, and then we're going to plug the fans that are on the radiator into these connectors at a later stage. Okay, so we're now ready to stand the case up and install the radiator. So we just now need to rotate these cables around. And then it's important that we pass these cables out the top so that we're going to be able to plug them in at the back of the case. There we go. So now we just need to screw in some of the screws at the top to secure the radiator. So it's important we don't tighten these down fully yet, because we might want to adjust the position of it, and it's only once we're happy with where the radiator is we can then tighten it down and secure the radiator in the exact place we want it to be. Okay, so we just need to decide where exactly we want that. I think we probably want that centered over this way, so it's in the middle of the motherboard area. So I'm now going to tighten these screws in to secure the radiator in place. Okay, so the next thing we need to do then is connect up the 4-pin fan headers coming out from each of the fans on top of the radiator. So that's the two of them there. And we're going to connect these into this splitter that we had passed through earlier. So one there and one there. So we still need to plug in all the RGB cables and RGB hub, but we're going to leave that until after we've installed the rest of the case fans. Okay, so next thing to do is install the fans on this case. So we can install a 120mm fan at the rear. We can install two 120mm fans at the bottom, and then there's room for three 120mm fans at the front. Now, I'm not going to install all the fans separately. I've got something different today. So Cooler Master make your standard 120mm fan, but they also make two 120mm fans joined together. And the advantage of this is that I've only got two cables, one for RGB and one for power. Whereas if I was to use two separate fans, I would have four cables to plug in. And as well, they have made combined three 120mm fans into one 360mm fan, and again only two cables coming from it instead of the six that I would usually have to use. So this should hopefully make the installation a little bit more straightforward. The other important thing, as I've already mentioned, the fans have to be installed in the right orientation. So I want air coming in from the front of the case, bringing air in. So I need to install the fans in this orientation. So the front of the fans needs to be facing the front of the case. It's also important that the cables come out this side. I have this facing the back of the case so that we're not going to see the cables. I want air coming in from the bottom of the case and up to supply the GPU. And again, I want air coming out the back of the case. So it's important I install this fan the right way round so that it's blowing air from the case out the back. And again, taking care with the cables so that they're all facing away from the front of the case so we're not going to see them. So it's important to mention the cables that are coming from each of the fans. So each of the fans has a power cable, a 4-pin cable that's going to go into one of the chassis fan headers on the motherboard. And this motherboard has 3 chassis fan headers, and I've got 3 fans, so that's the perfect. And it also has an addressable RGB cable coming from it. So all I'm going to do is route the addressable RGB cable to the back of the case and sort those out at a later stage. And I'm going to plug in the 4-pin power connector as I go. Okay, so the first chassis fan header is over here. So I'm going to plug it in. And if I route this cable up the back here, so again, just deciding exactly where I want this, and then tighten up the fans. Again, take care not to over tighten the fans. Okay, so the next fan to install is the one down the bottom of the case. And we've got 2 more chassis fan headers in the motherboard. They're both down the bottom there. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that into there. And the RGB cable, just going to put it down the back of the case for now. Now again, I've been really careful. Once I put these fans in, I'm going to make it really difficult for myself to install anything that I need down the bottom of the case. So I'm looking, the only additional thing I'm going to want to plug in is another fan header for the fan at the front. And as well as that, then there's the addressable RGB header I'm going to want to plug in to the controller that's going to control all the RGB. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that cable in now. Okay, so this is the cable that I'm going to plug in. The important thing about addressable RGB cables is they have 3 pins. There's almost a gap where the 4th pin you'd expect to be. And you can't plug this into a standard 4-pin RGB header. So you can see I've got a 4-pin one over to the left of the case and a 3-pin addressable one over to the right. So this is the addressable cable. I'm going to have to plug it into the addressable header. Okay, and then we'll just put the rest of the wires down the back of the case for later. These 4-pin fan connectors are easy enough to plug in, so I'm not going to worry too much about plugging in the fans at the front for now. There's extra long screws that come with the case, which are designed to install the fans at the bottom, so you won't get these screws with any of the fans that you buy. They're coming specifically with the case for installing fans in this location. One of the nice things about this case that makes installing the fans really straightforward is you can actually remove this front bracket and install the fan outside the case. So there's 2 little screws. There's one at the front here. We just need to unscrew. And then the second one at the back. And that then means the front bracket can just come out like this, and you can install the fan and then put it back into the case. Okay, so we just clip the bracket into and then feed the cables coming out of the fans out the back of the case. we just need to secure the front bracket in again with these 2 screws. And then we just need to plug in the power cable coming from the front fan. Okay, next thing to do is plug in the RGB, and to do so I'm going to need to use this Cooler Master hub that came with the CPU cooler. So at the top we've got SATA power. We're going to plug that in later when we plug in our power supply. Down the bottom, this cable needs to plug into one of the USB 2.0 headers on our motherboard. The little cable that we ran from our addressable header on our motherboard is going to plug into here, and that allows the motherboard to bypass this controller and control all the fans. We're going to plug, there's 4 headers for addressable RGB on the side, and we're going to plug our fans and CPU pump header into here. And over the other side then we need to plug, there's a little cable that comes from the flange that are from the CPU cooler that needs to plug into here. Okay, so we'll make a start in getting some of this plugged in. Okay, so I'm going to make a start with the CPU cooler. So we've got this little green wire that's coming off the splitter cable that we had earlier, and we're going to plug it into one of the ports on the left hand side of this hub. So SATA's at the top, and it's the second from the top. It's got a little fan logo on it. So we're going to go ahead and plug that in. Next thing we need to do is we need to plug in the RGB cable coming from the pump header. So we need to use one of these little adapters that comes in the packaging. Okay, so this is the cable coming from the CPU pump header. So we plug the little adapter in. So I'm going to plug this into, let's see, A1. Okay, so that's plugged in now. Next thing, we've got the 2 addressable headers coming from the 2 fans on the CPU cooler. So we're going to plug them into each of this triple fan splitter cable that comes with the pack. And then plug the other end of this into the next port on the hub. So we're going to need to use another one of these little adapters. And that's going to plug into the second port on the RGB hub. So we've got 1 spare port left on this hub. So what we can do is we can plug in the fan at the rear of the case into it. So we've got two spaces left on the hub to plug into, and we've got 2 more fans that we need to plug in. Okay, so we've got the addressable RGB header coming from the fan at the front of the case. So we'll bring it across. And then we've got the fan coming from the bottom of the case. So this was the little connector that we had mentioned is plugged into the motherboard. So it's going to plug into the bottom of the controller here to allow the motherboard software to control this hub. So the front of the case still needs to be plugged in, and thankfully we've got 1 more connector, which was a multi-connector coming off the fan at the back, so we can plug it in to here. And the last thing is then we need to plug in the USB cable, which is then going to go to the USB 2.0 header on the motherboard to allow us to control the software and also to update the firmware of the hub itself. Just down the bottom here we've got a USB 2.0 header that I can plug into. Okay, next thing to install then is the hard drives and SATA SSD. So we've got a hard drive cage in here where we can install up to 3 drives, so that's where we're going to install them. There's also an option that you can mount the hard drives and SSDs on the back of the case and have them on display. But for me it just makes sense to have them mounted in here and out of the way. So to do that we need to remove the cages, and we're going to need to take 2 of these out because we've got 2 drives to install. Okay, so the first drive we're going to install is the hard drive. So importantly, the connections are on the back of the drive. We've got one for power and one for data. So we need to put this in so that these connections are facing the back of the case. And then if you have a look at the side, we've got 3 screws on each side to secure the hard drive in place. So we're just going to screw these in. Okay, so that's the hard drive installed. Next we're going to install the SSD. And similar to the hard drive, the connections are going to be in the back, so we want to make sure that's installed at the back. So we turn it over, line it up, and this time we're going to install the screws from the bottom. Okay, so that's the SSD installed as well. Okay, so all we need to do is drop the drives into the cage and then close the door to secure them in place. And we're going to need to connect them obviously up from the back. As I mentioned, the back of the hard drives we've got 2 connectors. The smaller one is for data on the right hand side and the larger one for power on the left hand side. So we can go ahead and plug in the 2 SATA cables that came with our motherboard into the data cables. And there's a little locking clip that should lock that into place. And then we can bring these around to the motherboard and plug them into the SATA headers on the motherboard. Okay, so we've got a row of SATA connectors, 1 through 6, all the way here on the motherboard. So we're just going to go ahead and plug the SATA data cables in. So I'm just going to pick the first 2 to plug into. Okay, next thing I want to do is install the power supply. Okay, so taking a look at the power supply, we've got a fully modular power supply, and that means that it comes without any cables plugged into it. You can get some where all the cables are plugged in, or you can get semi-modular where some cables are plugged in and there's also spaces for you to plug in optional cables. One of the nice things about this is you can only need to plug in the cables that you want. And that means that you're not going to have lots of cables that you're not going to use plugged in at the back of your case, taking up space. So we're going to plug in the cables that we're going to need. So this is our 24-pin power supply, and you can see it's labelled, let's see, there at the top, so 24-pin ATX. So it's going to plug in here. And here. So you're better to plug your cables in before you put the power supply into the case because it's quite difficult plugging them in afterwards. So that's our 24-pin plugged in. So here we've got an 8-pin cable for the CPU. And let's see down here, we've got space for that here. Graphics card. So this is 2 8-pins. Our graphics card is going to take an 8 and a 6. So this is going to be perfect. We just need one cable from the power supply for it. And one of the nice things, they're all labelled on the back of the power supply as to what they plug into. And then the last cable that we're going to need to plug in is a SATA cable. So we need to plug in 4 SATA connectors. We've got one on the USB hub, the case has one, and we've got 2 SATA discs. So I've got 2 cables here, each of them has 3 SATA connectors, so we're going to need to plug 2 of them in. Okay, so that's all the cables we need plugged into our power supply. The next thing is to put the power supply into the case. Okay, so we've got our power supply here and it's going to go down the bottom of the case here. So it's important to note there's a fan here, there's a little vent at the bottom of the case, so we're going to install it with the fan facing down. So just make sure there's none of the other cables in the way, and if we slide this in at the bottom, there we go. And then there's 4 screws which we're going to use to secure the power supply to the back of the case. And these screws come with the case itself. Okay, so that's the power supply secured. Next thing is to connect up the cables. Okay, so earlier on we plugged in 2 extension cables to our motherboard. So we've got the 24-pin connector here, and we've got the 8-pin CPU connector here. Now, these were optional. We didn't have to use these cable extensions, and what we could have done is plug this 24-pin connector straight into the motherboard. And we've also got an 8-pin connector for the CPU, which we could have plugged straight into the CPU. But we've elected to use the extensions because they look better. So all we need to do now is to plug these cables into the extensions instead of the motherboard. So this one's going to plug into the CPU. And then we've got our 24-pin cable here, which is going to plug in as well. So we haven't installed the graphics card yet, but this is going to be the cable for the graphics card. And likewise, if you don't want to use cable extensions, you don't need to, but it's going to look much better. So we've got an 8-pin and a 6-pin is what we need for our graphics card. So I'm going to plug the cable extensions in now. So we've got the 8-pin connector. And we're also going to need a 6-pin connector. And this is then going to go to the graphics card once we install it. Okay, so the last thing to plug in is all the cables that we had left earlier. So we've already plugged our SATA data cables in, but we need to plug our SATA power cables in. So we've got one of the cables here we can plug in to the SSD, and then the one below we can plug into the hard drive. We also need a connector for the front panel cable on the case. So it makes sense that we plug into this additional cable here. And then the only other place that was going to need SATA power was the RGB hub. So we can go ahead and plug this into the top of the hub. Okay, so that should be everything powered up. Obviously we're going to have to cable management and make everything look nice and neat, but we're going to leave that for now and go ahead and install the graphics card next. Okay, so I've got our graphics card here and it's the next thing to install. So I mentioned I'm going to install this in a vertical orientation because I think it looks much better. But I'm going to show you how to install it in the standard horizontal orientation as well, in case you don't want to pay the extra money for a vertical bracket. Okay, so we're going to install our graphics card into this top slot here because it's going to give us the fastest speeds. And also, I've already mentioned, we have now disabled this one, given that we've installed an M.2 SSD. So to install the graphics card, we're going to need to remove the brackets at the side. So we're going to need to remove the second bracket and the third bracket from the top. So we just loosen the thumb screw. And these them white little brackets should just fall out. Okay, all we would need to do then is there's a little clip here. Make sure it's pushed back in the open position. And then we would just need to line this slot up with this slot and push it into place. And again, it'll make a click when it falls into place. There we go, so that's it locked into place. So to secure it into place, we just use the 2 thumb screws back into here, and then we need to plug our extension cables into the 8-pin and the 6-pin power supply. But I'm not going to show you that now, I'm going to take it back out again. So just need to push this little clip back, and then we should be able to take the graphics card out again. So because we're going to be installing the vertical GPU, we need to remove all these white brackets by loosening all the thumb screws. Okay, so this is the vertical GPU bracket that Leanne Lee make specifically for this case. So it comes in 2 parts, and the idea of the 2 parts is you can either install the graphics card in a high or a low position. So if you don't have any fans installed at the bottom, this little bracket will then install in the high position at the top to fill in the gap at the top. If, like we do, you have fans at the bottom, you need to install it this way round, so it helps the graphics card sit up above the fans. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to put the 2 screws in this bit. Okay, so that's the bracket together. So I find that it's much easier to install the graphics card into the bracket and then put the whole thing into the case than it is to install the bracket in the case and then put the graphics card into the case. So we're going to install the graphics card next. And the graphics card, all we want to do is make sure this little clip at the bottom is open and insert the graphics card in. And again, if we push down, it should lock into place. And you can hear the clip closing. Next thing, we just want to secure it again with the thumb screws at the top. Okay, next thing is to put the graphics card into the case. Okay, so we're just about to install the graphics cards. So I'm going to need to plug this top cable into the top PCIe slot. So I'm going to set the graphics card half the way in, plug the cable in, and then secure the graphics card. Okay, so that's the cable locked into place. And then all I need to do is slide the graphics card in at the side. And then we just need to tighten it up with the thumb screws again. Okay, last thing then to do is to plug in the cables. Okay, so the last thing to install, I've got an addressable RGB strip, which is designed to go along the front of the case, just along here. This little cable, there's a spare port on the back of the case designed specifically for this, so we're going to be able to plug it in, okay? So this is the little connector I was talking about. You just need to pull this protector off and then we can plug in to here. Okay, so that's everything connected up. The next job that we have to do is make all these cables look tidy. And it's not too bad in this case because we've got the two metal covers that are going to cover most of them. And we can use some cable ties there's cable tie points where we can tie the cables down and make everything look a little bit more tidy than what it is. It's a little bit more important in this case because the back top half of the case is going to be on display behind a glass panel. I've got everything connected up and we just need to power it on and see will it boot. One last step before I do that, I need to plug in my Windows 10 bootable USB drive. At the moment the computer's got no operating system in it, the hard drives and SSDs are completely blank. So I'm going to need to boot Windows off this and use this to install Windows onto one of my SSDs. So I just need to plug this into the back. And then press the power switch. Okay, so there's some lights on the motherboard, which is always a good sign. So moment of truth, we're going to press the power button and see what happens. So good sign, things are starting to spin and light up. So all we need to see is what happens with the screen. So that's a good sign. We've got the ASRock logo coming up. And the next thing we're waiting for, does it pick up the Windows bootable drive and start to load the Windows install screen? So perfect. So the Windows installer has booted from the USB drive and we're now in a position to install Windows onto the computer. Okay, so we've got United Kingdom, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, so we'll just hit next. And we want to install now. So if you've got a product key, you should enter it now. I do have a Windows 10 product key, so I'm going to put it in. But we're going to accept the license terms, and we want to do a custom install. So now we're at the stage where we have to pick which drive we want to install Windows on. So drive 0 looks to be my SATA SSD. Drive 1 looks to be the 2TB hard drive. And drive 2 is the M.2 SSD, which is 1TB. So I want to install this on drive 0. So I'm just going to hit next. And we just need to let Windows run through the steps. Okay, so we just need to follow through the steps. So we're in the United Kingdom. So we're able to go ahead and unplug the USB disk. Okay, so we've now got Windows running off the SSD that we installed. So we go to this PC, you'll notice that actually only one of the hard drives is showing up. It's the SATA SSD. So we need to go into disk management to load up the other one. So if I type in disk management, this little icon's going to pop up, create and format hard drives. So we click on that and we're just going to go OK. So we've got disk 0, which is our SSD. We've then got our hard drive. So we just need to right click on the hard drive and create new simple volume. next, 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 and we're just going to call it hard drive. So we go, so we've now got the hard drive showing up. And we need to do the same thing with our 1 terabyte M.2 SSD. So new simple volume, next, and then if we want to name the C drive, we can just go to properties and we're going to call it okay. So now if we go back to the PC, we've got the SATA SSD, which is C, we've got the hard drive, and we've got the M.2 SSD all showing up. So the next thing we want to do is let Windows complete all its updates. So if we go to Settings, Updates and Security, and check for updates. And we're basically going to let everything complete before we go and look at anything else. See how the installations are getting on, so they're still going strong. And what we basically want to do is let all these install, that will restart. We're going to open it up again, we're going to check for more updates, and then we're only going to do anything else once everything else is installed. Okay, so that's everything fully up to date. So the next thing we can do is we can go and install the drivers for the GPU. So we need to head over to NVIDIA's site and click on NVIDIA GeForce Experience. So we're going to download this, run. Okay, so we're going to go agree and install. Okay, so we need to go over to drivers. Game ready driver, we're going to hit download. And we're just going to go express installation. Yes. And what you'll notice, somewhere during this installation, the screen will flicker as the new drivers are installed. Okay, so that's that installed. We can hit close. Now, Windows will have found most of the drivers for our computer, but if we did want to install more drivers, we can do it over at ASRock's website. So we type in Steel Legend, and there's the B450 Steel Legend. Go to download. So here you've got all the drivers. Windows will have found most of these, but if there's anything extra you want to install, you can install it from here. Likewise, if you want to update your BIOS, you can get the latest BIOS version from here. Okay, so there's 3 more bits of software you're probably going to want to download to allow you to control all the RGB in the build. So if we head over to ASRock's page for the B450 Steel Legend, and we want to download the ASRock Polychrome RGB. So we click on Global, let it download down the bottom here. We're going to click on the file. It's going to ask us about extracting it. We're going to go extract all and extract. And then all we need to do is double click here to install the program. Okay, so all we need to do is click on the logo to open it. And we're currently set to rainbow mode. So we can go through this and configure any of the colors on our motherboard. Okay, so that's the first bit of software. Close it over. So the second bit of software you're going to want is for your graphics card. So we head over to ASUS's website, and this is really well hidden. So we just find your graphics card. This is the version of ours. And what you want to do is go down under utilities. So it's well hidden under utilities. You have to click the see all downloads button, and it's the second one that we want, Aura RGB lighting control for graphics card, and hit download. I'm not going to run through the same instructions again of showing you how to download it. It's just the same as the ASRock software. So then we're just going to click on it to open it. And that's the software there, so we can change any of the effects on the graphics card as well. And then the final bit of software you're going to want to download comes from Cooler Master's website. And again, I'm going to put links to all this in the description. So this is for the RGB hub that we've installed. So the first thing you're going to want to do is update the hub firmware, which is here. And then you're going to want to install Master Plus. Again, I'm not going to show you how to do it. It's exactly the same as the ASRock software. I've got it installed here, so I'm just going to double click it. And then again, I can go in and adjust any of the settings. Remember all the channels that we plugged into? I can adjust any of the effects on that. So there's just one last thing I'm going to show you. And that is when our memory won't be running at the full 3200 megahertz. So we need to go into the BIOS and adjust the memory speed. So what I need to do is go to restart. And whenever the ASRock logo comes up, I need to press the delete key to get into the BIOS. The computer's restarting, and wait until I see the screen come up. I'm going to press delete. And that should load me into the BIOS. So you can see we've got the Steel Legend, we're running version 3.2. It's picked up the Ryzen 7. We've got our memory, we've got 16 gigabytes of memory, and we're only running at 2133 megahertz. So we are going to need to go and adjust that. So we go to the frequency, so we can turn it up to 3200 megahertz. Okay, and then we hit exit, and we're going to go save changes and exit. Okay, so that's me done. That's the PC built, and that's the main bits that I wanted to show you for building and setting up a new PC. So hopefully you found this useful. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments section and I'll get back to you. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe for future videos. Thanks for watching.
Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out.